The record store that only appears. During storms, I've never told anyone about this. Not really. There are things you experience that feel too fragile to speak aloud, as if naming them would somehow make them less real, or worse, more real than you're ready to accept. But I think about it every time it rains now. Every time the sky turns that particular shade of bruised gray, and the air takes on that metallic weight that promises a storm. If you're listening to this, you probably understand what I mean. That feeling of carrying something you can't quite explain. Something that sits just behind your sternum and refuses to be named. It started after the loss. I won't tell you what I lost, or maybe I can't. Even now, the shape of it feels too large to fit into words. Grief does that sometimes. It becomes this vast, formless thing that you carry everywhere, and after a while, you stop trying to describe it. You just learn to move around it, the way you'd navigate a dark room you've memorized by touch. What I can tell you is that afterward, I became a walker. Every evening, just as the light was fading, I'd leave my apartment and wander through the quiet streets of my town. It's not a big place, one of those aging industrial towns that never quite recovered from whatever economic shift happened decades ago. The kind of place where half the storefronts are empty and the remaining businesses have that weary, persistent quality of dandelions growing through concrete. I needed noise, you see, but I kept choosing silence. Does that make sense? I wanted to be around people, around life, but I couldn't bear to actually engage with it. So I walked through the twilight hours when the streets were mostly empty, when I could feel the presence of the town without having to acknowledge it directly. There was something comforting about that liminal time. Not quite day, not quite night. The in-between hour when the street lights flicker on and the air turns blue and everything feels like it's holding its breath. I had a route I preferred. It took me down Ashland Street, which ran along the old commercial district. The buildings there were mostly brick, 3 or 4 stories tall, built sometime in the 1920s when the town still believed in its own future. Most of them were abandoned now, their windows dark or covered with plywood, their facades slowly crumbling under the weight of decades. But there was something beautiful about them in the rain, and it rained often that autumn. More than usual, people said, though I wonder if I just noticed it more, because I was outside so much. The storms would roll in from the west, turning the sky purple-black and bringing with them this particular smell, metallic, sharp, mixed with wet pavement, and something else I could never quite identify. Something that reminded me of old records, that particular scent of vinyl that's been stored for years. I found myself walking faster on those evenings when the air felt heavy with approaching rain. There was something about the atmosphere before a storm that felt right to me, that matched the weather inside my chest. The muted hum of distant thunder, the way the world seemed to quiet down and turn inward, waiting. It was during one of these walks, on an evening in late October, when the first real storm of the season was gathering overhead, that I noticed the record store. I was halfway down Ashland Street when the rain started. Not the tentative sprinkle that sometimes passes for rain, but the real thing. Heavy drops that hit the pavement like they had weight and intention. I'd left my umbrella at home, as I often did. I think part of me wanted to feel the rain. wanted the physical sensation of it to match the internal weather I carried everywhere. The street was empty as usual. Most of the shops had been closed for years. There was a barber shop that still operated somehow, and a tax preparation office that looked like it might have last prepared taxes in 1987, and a pawn shop with bars on the windows. But mostly it was just empty buildings with empty windows, reflecting nothing but their own emptiness back at themselves. Except at the end of the street, where I was certain there had only been another boarded up storefront, there was light. Warm golden light spilling out through fogged windows, pooling on the wet sidewalk like honey. I stopped walking. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking through my jacket, running down my face. But I stood there staring at that impossible glow. The building was narrow, squeezed between two larger structures, the kind of space you might not even notice in daylight. But now, in the storm-dark evening, it was the only source of light on the entire street. I could see a sign above the door, old-fashioned letters in faded gold leaf. Reverie Records. My first thought. And you have to understand, I was still trying to be logical then, still trying to make the world make sense. My first thought was that maybe it had always been there, and I simply hadn't noticed. Ashland Street was part of my regular route. Yes, but I was usually lost in my own thoughts when I walked. It was entirely possible that I'd passed this place dozens of times and never registered it. Old shops sometimes reopened, didn't they? Maybe someone had renovated the space. Maybe this was a new business trying to capitalize on the vinyl revival that seemed to be happening everywhere. The door was slightly ajar. I don't know why, but that detail bothered me more than anything else. Not open, not closed. Just ajar, as if someone had just stepped inside and forgotten to pull it shut behind them. Or as if the door itself was breathing. I should have kept walking. I should have continued my route. Circled back around to my apartment, changed into dry clothes, made tea, tried to sleep. That's what a reasonable person would have done. But I was standing in a downpour, staring at a record store that shouldn't exist, and I realized I hadn't felt this curious about anything in months, not since before the loss. And that tiny spark of interest, that small deviation from the numb routine I'd fallen into, felt precious enough to follow. I crossed the street. The rain seemed to intensify as I approached, as if trying to warn me back, but I kept walking until I was standing directly in front of the store, close enough to touch the door frame, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from inside. Through the fogged windows, I could see rows of records, wooden bins, the old kind, organized alphabetically. Posters on the walls, bands I recognized and some I didn't. A counter at the back, though I couldn't see anyone behind it. And underneath the sound of the rain, so faint I almost missed it, I heard music. Not the tinny sound of a stereo or speakers, but the warm, crackling sound of an actual record player. Vinyl spinning, needle tracking through grooves, that particular texture that digital music can never quite replicate. The melody was familiar, impossibly familiar. It took me a moment to place it, because the memory it summoned was so old, so deeply buried, that at first my mind refused to retrieve it. But then it came. A lullaby. Not a standard one, not Twinkle Twinkle or Rock-a-Bye Baby, but something personal, something specific. something someone used to hum to me when I was very young. A melody I hadn't thought about in 30 years. A melody that no one else should know. I felt something cold move through my chest that had nothing to do with the rain soaking through my clothes. My hand was on the doorframe, and I realized I'd been about to push it open, about to step inside without even deciding to do so. Instead, I stepped back. The logical part of my brain, the part that was still trying to make sense of things, still trying to maintain the fiction that the world operated according to understandable rules. That part suggested a simple explanation. The melody was probably more common than I remembered. Maybe it was based on a traditional tune, something I'd heard elsewhere and subconsciously associated with my childhood. Maybe the specific memory I'd attached to it was wrong, distorted by time and grief. Coincidences happened. Old stores reopened. Music played. There was nothing impossible about any of this. I repeated these thoughts to myself as I turned away and continued down the street, walking faster now, my shoes splashing through puddles that seemed deeper than they should be. The rain had turned the world into a watercolor painting, everything bleeding at the edges, and I didn't look back. But I could still hear it, even after I turned the corner, even after the store should have been far behind me. I could still hear that melody, crackling through the storm, like a radio signal that wouldn't quite fade. I told myself I'd imagined it. I told myself a lot of things. I didn't walk down Ashland Street for 3 days after that. I changed my route, taking the longer path through the residential neighborhoods instead. Past houses with lit windows and the blue glow of televisions, past families and normal lives, and the kind of everyday existence that felt as foreign to me as a language I'd never learned. But storms kept rolling through, one after another. And each time the rain started, I thought about that light at the end of the street. That warm, impossible glow. On the 4th day, when the afternoon sky turned the color of deep water and the first drops began to fall, I found myself walking toward Ashland Street without having consciously decided to do so. My feet carried me there, as if they'd been planning this route all along, as if my conscious mind had simply been waiting to catch up. The street looked the same as always. Empty storefronts, cracked pavement, the sad persistence of the barber shop and the pawn shop still clinging to life. But as the rain intensified, as the storm settled in properly overhead, I saw it again. The record store, the warm light, the fogged windows, the door, once again, slightly ajar. I stood across the street, rain streaming down my face, and tried to convince myself that I'd simply missed it before. Maybe the lighting had to be exactly right for me to notice it. Maybe it was one of those optical things where your brain filters out information until something forces you to really look. But I knew that wasn't true. I'd walked the street hundreds of times. I'd looked at every building, catalogued every detail. I knew the shape and color of every boarded window and every faded sign. This store had not been here before, except during storms. The thought arrived fully formed, certain, impossible. The store only appeared during storms. I almost laughed. The sound came out strange, half choked by rain. The idea was absurd. Buildings didn't appear and disappear based on weather. That wasn't how reality worked. That wasn't how anything worked. But I was looking at it. Right now. The evidence was in front of me, glowing in the rain. I could walk away again. I could add Ashland Street to the list of places I avoided, along with hospitals and funeral homes and anywhere that played music that reminded me of before. I could pretend I'd never seen this, could fold it into the category of things I didn't examine too closely. Or I could cross the street. This time, I crossed the street. The rain seemed to pause as I reached the door. Not stop exactly, but soften, as if holding back just enough to let me step inside. The door pushed open easily under my hand, moving on hinges that made no sound at all. Warmth enveloped me immediately. The smell hit me first. Dust and wood polish and old paper, mixed with something that might have been incense but sweeter, less cloying. And underneath it all, that distinctive scent of vinyl records. A smell that's almost plastic but not quite, mixed with decades of accumulated time. The interior was exactly as I'd glimpsed it through the fogged windows. Wooden bins arranged in neat rows, dividing the space into comfortable aisles. The walls were exposed brick, covered with posters from bands spanning decades. Some I recognized, some that looked like they might be from parallel universes where music evolved differently. The lighting came from old fixtures hanging from the ceiling, the kind with amber glass shades that turned everything sepia-toned, as if the store existed in a permanent golden hour. There was a counter at the back, and behind it, more shelves rising toward a ceiling that seemed higher than the building's exterior would allow. A record player sat on the counter, the same model my parents had owned, the kind with the heavy arm and the weight you had to adjust so the needle tracked properly. A record was spinning. I couldn't see what it was from where I stood, but I could hear it. Soft, instrumental music. Nothing I recognized this time. Just gentle piano and the warm crackle of analog sound. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded strange in the space, not echoing exactly, but absorbed somehow, as if the store itself had swallowed the sound and was considering whether to give it back. No one answered. I stood there dripping on the hardwood floor, waiting for someone to emerge from the back room or pop up from behind the counter. But the store remained empty except for me and the music and the thousands of records lining the walls. I should have left then. The situation was weird enough. An impossible store, no staff, a door left open during a storm, that any reasonable person would have retreated immediately. But the warmth felt so good after the cold rain, and the light was so gentle, and I hadn't been in a record store in years. I hadn't allowed myself to be in a record store in years. Music had become too painful. Every song was a potential trigger. Every melody a possible trap that might remind me of before, of what I'd lost, of all the reasons I walked alone through empty streets at twilight. But standing there, surrounded by records, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. A small, tentative sense of peace. I started walking through the aisles. The records were organized alphabetically, but there was something slightly off about the arrangement. I noticed it gradually as I browsed. Certain albums were in places they shouldn't be, as if the alphabet followed different rules here. And some of the artists I'd never heard of, their names printed on spines in fonts that seemed to shift when I looked at them directly. I pulled out a record at random. The cover showed a landscape I didn't recognize. A city built on impossible angles, towers that curved into themselves, streets that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. The artist was listed as the cartographers of lost hours. When I slipped the record out of its sleeve, it felt warm. Not just room temperature warm, but genuinely warm, as if someone had been holding it moments before. I put it back quickly and kept walking. The store seemed larger inside than it should be. I'd seen the exterior. It was a narrow building squeezed between two others. But inside, the aisles stretched back farther than seemed possible, and when I looked up, I could no longer see where the ceiling ended. The amber light just kept going, fading into a soft darkness that might have been height or might have been something else. I found myself in a section labeled Local Artists. The divider card was handwritten in beautiful calligraphy that looked like it had been done with a fountain pen. The records here were different. Their covers looked homemade. Hand-drawn artwork, photocopied liner notes, that DIY aesthetic of bands that never made it out of their hometown. I recognized some of the local venues listed on the backs: the Firehouse, the Underground, Pete's Garage, all places that had closed years ago. I was flipping through the bins, lost in a kind of nostalgic reverie for a music scene I'd only been peripherally aware of, when I saw it. A record with my name on it. Not my full name, my childhood nickname, the one only 3 people in the world had ever used, and 2 of them were dead now. I froze. The cover was blank except for the name, written in that same flowing calligraphy. My hands were shaken as I pulled it out. The sleeve felt wrong, too light or too heavy. I couldn't tell which. Like it was vibrating at a frequency just below what my nerves could register. I stood there holding it, staring at my own childhood name, and I realized I was crying. The rain outside had intensified. I could hear it hammering against the windows, a sound like fingers drumming, like something trying to get in, or maybe trying to keep something in. The record on the counter had stopped playing. The store was silent now, except for the rain and my own shallow breathing. I put the record back in the bin. I put it back, and I walked toward the door, and I did not run, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. The door opened easily. The rain felt colder than before, sharper, and I welcomed it. I walked away quickly, my heart pounding, my hands still shaking, and I did not look back, but I could feel it behind me. The store, watching, the warmth of it reaching after me like a hand. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to the rain and trying to convince myself that I'd misread the name on that record, that it had been similar to my nickname but not exact. That grief and exhaustion and the strange atmosphere of that impossible place had combined to make me see something that wasn't there. But I knew what I'd seen. And I knew, with a certainty that felt like cold water in my veins, that I would go back. Because here's the thing about grief, about loss. It makes you hungry for connection, even impossible connection. Especially impossible connection. When the real world feels emptied out, when everyone you talk to seems to be speaking a language you can no longer quite understand, you start looking for meaning in strange places. You start listening for your name in empty record stores that appear during storms. The rain continued for days. That autumn was turning into one of those seasons where it felt like the sky had forgotten how to be anything other than gray. where the weather became a permanent state rather than a temporary condition. And every time it rained, I found myself walking toward Ashland Street. I developed a pattern. I would wait until the storm properly established itself. Not just sprinkles, but real rain. The kind that turned the gutters into rivers and made the streetlights blur into watercolor smears. Then I would walk to the end of Ashland Street and stand across from where the store would be. And it would be there, always the same warm light, always the fogged windows, always the door slightly ajar, as if waiting for me. I started noticing details I'd missed before. The store sign, Reverie Records, would flicker in the puddles on the street, its reflection rippling with the rain. But when I looked up at the actual sign, it never flickered. The letters remained steady, glowing in that faded gold leaf, and my reflection in the puddles would behave oddly. Sometimes it would linger after I'd moved, as if taking a moment to catch up. Sometimes it would be facing a different direction, looking at something I couldn't see. I should have been terrified. I should have left town, or at least stopped walking down Ashland Street. But the thing about slow horror is that you adjust to it. Each impossible thing becomes the new normal, and you find ways to rationalize even the most irrational experiences. Maybe I was having a breakdown. Maybe this was what grief looked like when it finally overwhelmed your ability to process it. Hallucinations, false memories, seeing meaning in random coincidences. Maybe none of this was real, but it felt real. And after so many months of feeling nothing at all, even fear was a welcome change. On the 7th day of rain, I went inside again. This time I was ready. I decided that if the store was some kind of delusion, some manifestation of my deteriorating mental state, then I might as well explore it properly. If I was losing my mind, I wanted to understand the landscape of my madness. The store looked exactly the same warm light, the same amber glow from the ceiling fixtures, the same gentle crackle of a record playing somewhere in the back. But now I noticed things I'd missed before. The wooden floorboards hummed very slightly under my feet, as if something below them was vibrating. Not mechanical. It felt organic, like a heartbeat, a pulse running through the building's structure. And the music was different this time. Still instrumental, still gentle, but the melody had changed to match something I was feeling. A kind of wistful sadness, a nostalgia for something I couldn't quite name. It was playing my mood. The realization should have frightened me more than it did. I walked back to the local artists section, to the bin where I'd seen the record with my childhood name on it. I told myself I just wanted to confirm it had been real, to verify my memory. But really, I wanted to see it again. I wanted to hold something that knew me, even if it was impossible. The record was there, in the exact same position. I pulled it out carefully, treating it like something that might shatter if I moved too quickly. The cover was still blank except for my name. The sleeve felt warm again, that same disconcerting sensation of it having been recently held. I looked around. The store was still empty. No staff, no other customers. Just me and thousands of records and that constant, gentle pulse running through the floor. I opened the sleeve. Inside was not a record, but a photograph. Old, faded at the edges, the colors slightly off in that way. Photos from the 70s always looked. It showed a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing in what looked like a record store. The child was reaching up toward a bin of records, standing on tiptoes, face tilted up in concentration. The child was me. I recognized my younger self immediately. The specific haircut I'd had at that age. The shirt I remembered owning. The exact posture I'd had as a child when I was trying to reach something just beyond my grasp, but I'd never been in this record store. I would have remembered. And anyway, this building didn't exist when I was a child. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in the same flowing calligraphy as the record labels, someone had written, "The first visit is never the first visit." My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the photograph. The music had changed again. Now it was playing something else I recognized. Not a melody this time, but sounds. The creak of floorboards, the rustle of someone moving in another room. A soft voice humming, though I couldn't make out the tune. Sounds from my childhood. Sounds from my home. From before. I looked up, and the store had changed. Not dramatically. It was still the same rows of records, the same amber light, but the posters on the walls had shifted to show bands from my teenage years, albums I'd owned, concerts I'd attended. And the section dividers, those handwritten cards, now showed categories that felt deeply personal. Songs you listened to while falling in love. Albums you played after the loss. Music you're afraid to hear again. The store was rearranging itself around me. It was showing me myself. I put the photograph back in the sleeve back in the bin, and I backed away slowly. The pulse in the floor seemed stronger now, faster, as if the building's heartbeat was accelerating. The record on the counter had stopped playing, leaving only silence and the sound of rain. "What are you?" I whispered. The lights flickered once, gently, and for just a moment I could have sworn I heard an answer. Not words exactly, but a feeling that translated into meaning. "I remember what you've forgotten. I keep what you've lost." I ran then. I ran out into the rain and didn't stop until I was 6 blocks away, soaked through, gasping for breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. But even as I ran, some part of me was already planning to return. I tried to stay away. I really did. I avoided Ashland Street entirely, even on clear days. I changed my walking route to the other side of town. I stayed inside when it rained, watching the storm through my apartment window, resisting the pull I felt toward that impossible place. But the dream started. Every night, I would dream of the store. I would be walking through those aisles, pulling out records, each one containing some fragment of my past. Photographs, letters, ticket stubs from concerts I'd forgotten I'd attended. And underneath it all, that steady pulse, that heartbeat running through everything. Sometimes, in the dreams, I would reach the back of the store and find a door I hadn't noticed before. It would be slightly ajar. Everything in that place was always slightly ajar, as if inviting me to push just a little harder, to cross just one more threshold. I never went through the door in the dreams. I would wake up just as I was reaching for the handle, my own heart synchronized with that phantom pulse. During the day, I started noticing changes in the waking world. Music would follow me. Not literally. I'm not describing some kind of haunting where ghostly melodies appeared out of nowhere. But everywhere I went, whatever was playing in the background seemed to match my emotional state with eerie precision. The grocery store would be playing a song I'd cried to weeks after the loss. The coffee shop would have on an album I'd listened to obsessively as a teenager. And sometimes, in reflections, store windows, puddles, the screen of my phone before it woke up, I would see not my current self, but my younger self, the child from the photograph, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I started researching the building. I went to the library, pulled up old property records, looked through historical photographs of the town. The space where Reverie Records appeared had been empty for as long as records existed. Before that, it had been part of a larger building that burned down in 1962. But in one photograph from the 1950s, before the fire, I could just make out a sign in that narrow space between buildings. The image was too blurry to read clearly, but it looked like it might have said records. I asked older residents about it, casually, trying not to sound too interested. A few remembered there being a record store somewhere on Ashland Street decades ago, but no one could agree on exactly where or when it had closed. The details were fuzzy, contradictory. Might have been called Reverie something, one old man told me at the diner where I sometimes ate breakfast. Or was it Reverb? I used to go there as a kid, but hell, that was 50 years ago. Place burned down, I think, or maybe it just closed. Memory's a funny thing. Yes, I thought. Memory is a funny thing. The rain continued. November arrived and felt more like March, constant grey skies, constant moisture, the world perpetually on the edge of storm. And I kept being pulled back. It's hard to explain the compulsion. It wasn't like an addiction, where you know you shouldn't do something, but you do it anyway. It was more fundamental than that. It felt like gravity, like the store was a weight in the landscape, and I was constantly falling toward it. After 2 weeks of resistance, during a storm so violent that the power went out in half the town, I walked back to Ashland Street. The store was there, of course, glowing brighter than I'd ever seen it, as if feeding on the energy of the storm. This time, I didn't hesitate at the door. I walked straight in, the warmth wrapped around me like an embrace. The record player was playing something I recognized immediately, an album I'd listened to with someone I'd lost. Not the person I was grieving most acutely, but someone else. Someone whose loss I'd almost forgotten about because it had been overshadowed by larger grief. The store remembered them too. I walked through the aisles slowly, running my fingers along the spines of records. Everyone I touched felt warm. Everyone seemed to pulse very slightly, as if alive. The section dividers had multiplied, grown more specific. Songs from the summer you were happiest. Albums that played during arguments. Music from the last good day. I found myself in a section I hadn't noticed before. Tucked into a corner where the amber light seemed deeper, richer. The divider read, "Records from before the loss." I stopped breathing. There were dozens of albums here, maybe hundreds. I recognized some of them, records I'd owned, records I'd gotten rid of because they hurt too much to keep. But there were others I didn't remember, albums with my name on them, photographs of me that shouldn't exist. I pulled one out at random. The cover showed a landscape that might have been my hometown, but twisted, shifted, all the buildings in the wrong places. And there, in the middle of the street, A figure that might have been me, walking towards something just out of frame. I opened the sleeve. Inside was not a record but a recording. A cassette tape, the kind we used to use before everything became digital. It was labeled with a date from 15 years ago, and two words: last conversation. I knew immediately what it was. The last conversation I'd had with the person I'd lost. The one I tried so hard to remember and couldn't, as if my brain had protected me by erasing the specific words while leaving the general lake. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the cassette. The store seemed to be waiting, that pulse in the floor growing stronger, more insistent. Behind the counter, I saw it now. A cassette player, old and battered, sitting next to the record player. I could play it. I could hear their voice again. I started to cry. Not the gentle, manageable tears I'd learned to allow myself, but the deep, wrenching sobs I'd been holding back for months. I dropped to my knees right there in the aisle, clutching the cassette to my chest, and I let it out. The store seemed to breathe around me. The light pulsed in rhythm with my sobs, and I could have sworn I heard something. Not words, but a sound like sympathy, like understanding. When I finally looked up, my vision blurred by tears. I saw that the aisles had rearranged themselves. They formed a clear path now, leading to the back of the store, to that door I'd seen in my dreams. The door was open now, not slightly ajar like everything else, fully open, revealing darkness beyond, and in that darkness, a very faint light, as if from far away. I understood then. The store wasn't showing me my past, it was offering me a choice. I could play the cassette. I could listen to that last conversation, could have back what I'd lost. I could walk through that door and find everything the store was keeping for me. All the memories, all the moments, all the pieces of myself I tried to leave behind. But walking through meant staying. The knowledge arrived without words, certain and absolute. The store was a keeper of forgotten things, yes, but it kept them by taking them out of the world. Everyone who walked through that back door became part of the collection. Another voice on another record, another memory preserved in amber light. I thought about it. That's the part I'm least proud of. Not that I was tempted, but how long I seriously considered it. How close I came to standing up, to walking to that back room, to trading whatever remained of my future for the preserved past the store was offering. But I didn't. I put the cassette back in the sleeve back in the bin. I stood up on shaking legs, wiped my face with my wet sleeve, and I walked toward the front door. The store seemed to sigh around me, disappointed, but not surprised. The door opened easily. I stepped out into the rain, and I didn't look back. I didn't go near Ashland Street for 3 weeks after that. The rain continued, storm after storm rolling through, but I stayed away. I changed my walking route permanently, avoiding even the streets that would bring me close to that part of town. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. About the cassette. About that last conversation I could have heard. About all the memories stored in that impossible place, waiting for me. I tried to talk to a therapist about it. Not directly. I wasn't ready to sound that crazy. But I tried to explain the general feeling. The sense that I was being offered a trade. The pain of moving forward versus the comfort of staying in the past. Grief isn't something you get over, the therapist told me, kind but firm. It's something you learn to carry, And part of that means accepting that some things are lost and won't come back. I nodded and agreed, and didn't go back for another session. Because some things did come back, didn't they? Some things remembered you even when you tried to forget them. December arrived, and with it, the first snow mixed with rain. That miserable sleet that's worse than either weather alone. I was in my apartment, watching it come down, when I heard it. Music, faint, barely audible over the sound of the sleet against the windows. That same melody from the first time, the lullaby someone used to hum when I was young. It was coming from outside. I went to the window and looked out, and even though I was miles from Ashland Street, even though I was on the opposite side of town, I could see it. A warm glow in the distance, pulsing gently through the storm. The store calling to me. It had found me. Or maybe I'd never really left it? The next day, when the storm cleared and I walked through town during daylight, I saw it. A record store on the corner near my apartment, in a space that had been a laundromat the day before. Reverie Records. The sign looked like it had been there for decades. I checked the property records again. According to every official source, the building had been a record store since 1955, had changed hands twice, was currently owned by someone with the same last name as the person I'd lost. The world was rewriting itself around the store's existence. Or maybe the store had always been there, and I was only now seeing it clearly. That night, during another storm, I dreamed I was walking through the aisles again. But this time, I noticed something new. Scattered among the regular records were albums with no artist names, no titles, just photographs on the covers. And the photographs showed people, dozens of people, standing in the store, reaching for records, their faces frozen in expressions of longing and surrender. I recognized some of them. The old man from the diner who'd remembered the store. A woman I'd seen once walking down Ashland Street during a storm. Others I didn't know, but somehow felt I should. All of them had the same look in their eyes. Relief, peace. The expression of someone who'd finally stopped running from something that was always going to catch them anyway. When I woke up, I knew. It was time. The final storm came 3 days before Christmas. It wasn't the biggest storm of the season, but there was something different about it. Something that felt intentional. The rain fell in patterns that seemed almost rhythmic, and the thunder, when it came, sounded like music, like the bass notes of a song I almost recognized. I didn't fight it this time. I put on my coat, left my apartment, and walked through the empty streets toward Ashland Street. The town felt abandoned. Every window was dark, every door closed. The street lights flickered in a pattern that might have been Morse code, might have been random, might have been the heartbeat I'd first felt through the store's floorboards. The store was waiting at the end of the street. The light was brighter than I'd ever seen it, bright enough that I could see it from blocks away, a beacon in the storm. The door wasn't just slightly ajar this time. It was wide open, welcoming. I walked toward it slowly, letting the rain soak through my clothes one last time. I thought about turning back, about trying one more time to build a life in the world that existed outside this impossible place. But I was so tired, tired of grieving, tired of walking alone. tired of carrying all these memories with no place to put them down. The store could keep them for me. The store could keep me. I stepped inside. The warmth was overwhelming now, not uncomfortable, but total, wrapping around me like water, like embrace, like the end of a long race I'd been running without knowing it. The aisles stretched away in all directions, infinite now, all pretense of normal geometry abandoned. The amber light pulsed in rhythm with something I realized was my own heartbeat, and I understood that we were synchronizing, the store and I, becoming part of the same system. Music was playing from everywhere and nowhere, not from the record player, but from the walls, from the floorboards, from the air itself. I recognized every song. They were all mine, moments of my life translated into melody. I walked deeper into the store. The section dividers had changed one final time. Now they read, "Before you arrived," "While you're deciding," "After you stay." I was in the third section now, walking past records that didn't exist yet, albums that would be created from my presence here. My memories preserved and catalogued and added to the collection. I found the back room easily. The door was open, and beyond it was not darkness but something else. A space that defied description, where the amber light deepened into something that was either golden or bronze, or the color of old photographs, of preserved time. The cassette was playing now, though I hadn't touched the cassette player. I could hear that last conversation, those words I'd tried so hard to remember and had almost succeeded in forgetting. I stood in the doorway and listened. The voice I'd lost said, "It's okay to let go. It's okay to move on." But I'd spent so long thinking that moving on meant forgetting, and I couldn't bear to forget. The store had offered me a third option: to stay, to exist in this preserved moment, this endless golden hour, when nothing was forgotten and nothing was lost because time had stopped meaning what it meant outside. I stepped through the doorway. The world shifted. My body felt lighter immediately, as if gravity had released its hold, or as if I'd been carrying a weight I could finally put down. The rain faded to a distant hum, less like weather and more like white noise, like static between radio stations, like the sound of the universe breathing. The room beyond the door was vast. It contained the entire store, I realized, not as separate rooms, but as a single, infinite space folded in on itself. The aisles stretched away in impossible directions, and between them, I could see others, the people from my dream, the ones whose faces I'd recognized and the ones I hadn't. All of them moving between the records, filing memories, preserving moments, their bodies translucent now, made of light and sound. I understood. These were the keepers, the ones who'd chosen to stay, who'd given themselves to the store in exchange for holding on to what they couldn't bear to lose. And I was joining them. I felt myself begin to change. My edges blurred slightly, as if I was slowly becoming the same substance as the amber light, as if I was being developed like a photograph, my image preserved in the chemical solution of this impossible place. It didn't hurt. If anything, it felt like relief, like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. I took my place among the aisles, and I began to organize my own section. The records appeared as I thought of them. Every memory I'd carried, every moment I'd tried to preserve, every song that had ever meant something to me. I sorted them carefully, lovingly, creating categories that only I would understand. Songs from before I knew what loss was, albums I played while learning to be alone, music I'm no longer afraid of. Time passed or didn't. It was hard to tell. The store existed outside normal chronology, in a space where every moment was equally accessible, equally preserved. Sometimes I would see new people arrive, drawn by storms, wandering in with that same look of longing and grief I'd carried. I would help them sometimes, guide them to the sections they needed, show them the records that contained their own forgotten moments. Some would listen and leave, walking back out into the rain. Others would stay. I didn't judge either choice. I understood both. My own memories continued to organize themselves around me. I found photographs I'd forgotten I'd taken, letters I'd written but never sent, moments so small they shouldn't have mattered but somehow did. The store kept everything, and slowly, over time that wasn't time, I began to understand what I'd become. Not a ghost exactly, not dead, more like a memory that had taken on its own life, a preservation that had become preservation itself. I was part of the store now, and the store was part of me. And together, we would wade through the storms, keeping what the rain brought, offering shelter to those who needed a place to put down their grief. Sometimes, in the spaces between thoughts, I would wonder about the world outside, about the people who'd known me, who might have looked for me, who might have filed a missing persons report, or checked my apartment, or wondered where I'd gone. But those thoughts felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. The person I'd been was being slowly filed away, organized into memories, and the thing I was becoming had no name yet, no solid form, just light and music and the endless patience of preserved time. When the storm finally cleared, and it did clear eventually, though I only knew because the rain sounds faded to nothing, the street was empty again. No record store stood at the end of Ashland Street. The space between buildings was just a space, just empty brick and boarded windows, and the ordinary abandonment of a town that had been slowly dying for decades. But if you stand there on a clear day, if you listen very carefully, you might hear something. A soft crackle, like a needle on vinyl. A melody that feels familiar even though you've never heard it before. A sound like someone humming in another room, in another time, in a place that only appears during storms. And if you're carrying something too heavy to hold, grief or loss or memories you don't know how to organize, you might feel a pull toward that empty space, might notice it more during bad weather, might find yourself walking past during rain and seeing, just for a moment, a warm light where there shouldn't be one. The store is patient, the store remembers, and the store is always slightly ajar, waiting for the next person who needs to be kept, who needs to be preserved, who needs to stop running and finally put down what they've been carrying. I'm there now. Not in any place you could find on a map, not in any time you could mark on a calendar. But I'm there in the amber light and the gentle pulse and the careful organization of every moment that anyone has ever needed to remember. Sometimes, late at night, when storms roll through and the world turns liquid with rain, I think I can hear them. The people who walk past the store, the ones who feel that pull but resist it, who see the light and keep walking. I don't know if they're making the right choice. I don't know if I made the wrong one. All I know is that I'm here, preserved like a song on vinyl, spinning endlessly in a golden hour that never ends. And I'm finally, peacefully, terribly at rest. The store is still there, if you need it. It appears during storms, and it remembers. It always remembers.